The empire didn't crumble with a gunshot. It dissolved in the sound of a zipper and a closing door. Aidan Hayes, ruthless architect of the city's underbelly, was officially declared blind, paralyzed, and completely useless. His wife took the offshore accounts. His lieutenants took the streets. But they forgot the golden rule of a hostile takeover: never turn your back on a corpse until you see it rot. Behind fixed, unblinking eyes, Aidan saw everything, and the only ones left to witness his quiet resurrection were a terrified maid and his 2 weeping children. The smell of the room changed when Bianca left. It lost the sharp chemical bite of her expensive gardenia perfume and settled into the dull, stagnant odor of dust motes and cold leather. Aidan sat in the specialized orthopedic wheelchair, his hands resting exactly where the physical therapist had placed them 3 hours ago. His left fingers were slightly curled. His right hand lay flat. To the world, his spine was severed at the cervical level, his optic nerves crushed from the blunt force trauma of a calculated car wreck. In reality, his right calf was cramping so viciously he wanted to chew through his own tongue. He didn't move. He kept his eyes fixed on the middle distance, a blank, milky stare he had perfected over the last month in the hospital. He breathed shallowly, in 2-3, out 2-3. He heard the click of Bianca's heels on the hardwood. She didn't walk around to face him. She stood somewhere near the heavy oak doorway, muttering into her phone. "Declan has the keys to the South Side lockups," she was saying. Her voice was thin, stripped of the honeyed warmth she used at gala dinners. "Just leave the cripple. The nurses quit yesterday because the checks bounced. I'm not staying in this mausoleum to change adult diapers." A pause. A sharp exhale of cigarette smoke. "The kids, leave them. Declan said he'd send someone for them eventually, or child services will. I don't care. I'm going to the airport." The front door slammed. The heavy vibration rattled the floorboards, traveling up the metal spokes of Aidan's chair and settling deep in his bones. He was alone. No, not entirely alone. From the hallway, the erratic, muffled thumping of small feet broke the silence. Leo, 6 years old. Mia, barely 4. They stopped at the threshold of the study. Aidan didn't shift his gaze, but his peripheral vision caught them. 2 small, disheveled shapes clinging to the door frame. Mia was sucking her thumb, a habit she had supposedly outgrown a year ago. Leo looked like a cornered stray, his dark eyes darting around the empty room, looking for his mother. Aidan felt a sickening twist in his gut. He was a man who ordered executions between sips of espresso, who viewed human life as collateral or currency. He had treated his children as eventual heirs' investments to be shaped. But seeing them abandoned, discarded by the woman who birthed them, scraped against something raw and uncalloused in his chest. He couldn't speak. If he broke character now, the wiretap Declan had undoubtedly hidden in the study would pick it up. Declan was thorough. Declan wanted Aidan helpless so the old capos wouldn't suspect a coup. Stay still, Aidan told himself. Let the dust settle. A third shadow appeared in the doorway. Sadie. She was the Tuesday-Thursday housekeeper. A 22-year-old girl with a mountain of student debt, bruised knuckles from scrubbing grout, and a perpetually anxious slouch. She stood behind the children, holding a plastic bucket filled with bleach and rags. She wore a faded gray t-shirt and cheap denim. She smelled like ammonia and cheap vanilla lotion. She looked at the kids. Then she looked at the empty foyer. Then she looked at Aidan. "Mrs. Hayes," Sadie called out. Her voice trembled. The silence swallowed the sound. Sadie dropped the bucket. The plastic clattered against the floor. She knelt beside Leo, wiping a streak of dirt from his cheek with a rough red thumb. "Hey, buddy, where's your mom?" "She took a big suitcase," Leo whispered. "She said bad words." Aiden watched a muscle feather in Sadie's jaw. She looked up at the man in the wheelchair. Aiden maintained his vacant stare, staring at a patch of peeling wallpaper just above her head. He let his jaw hang slightly slack. Sadie stood slowly, walking into his field of vision. She waved a hand in front of his face. He didn't blink. The air shifted as she leaned closer. He could hear her breathing shallow, panicked. He could smell the stale sweat of a long bus ride on her skin. "Mr. Hayes," she whispered. "Nothing." She backed away, scrubbing her hands over her face. She was doing the math. No wife, no security detail. The grand house in the hills was completely empty, stripped of its paintings and silver, leaving only heavy furniture and a paralyzed blind man. She was off the clock. She wasn't getting paid. The smart move was to turn around, walk down the driveway, and catch the 4:15 bus back to the city. Aiden waited for her to leave. He expected it. Loyalty was bought, and his accounts were frozen. Sadie looked at the front door. She took a step toward it. Then Mia let out a soft hiccuping sob and buried her face in Sadie's jeans. Sadie stopped. Her shoulders slumped. She let out a long, ragged sigh that sounded like a surrender. "Okay," Sadie muttered, her voice cracking. "Okay, let's go find some macaroni and cheese." 3 days passed. The sprawling estate felt like a hollowed-out skull. The heating had been shut off on the second day. Aiden sat in his chair by the window. The physical toll of his deception was agonizing. His muscles screamed from atrophy and stiffness. When Sadie and the kids slept, he would carefully, agonizingly lower himself to the floor to do silent push-ups, working the stagnant blood back into his limbs. He navigated the dark house to find the hidden wall safe in his bedroom, pulling out the emergency stacks of untraceable cash, slipping a single $100 bill into Sadie's coat pocket so she would think she found forgotten money. By day he was a stone. Sadie had stayed. She didn't call the police. Aiden guessed she was afraid of what happens to kids in the system, or maybe she was afraid of the men in expensive suits who used to visit the house. She wasn't stupid. She knew who she worked for. It was mid-morning. Sadie wheeled him into the bathroom. The transition from the chair to the shower seat was a clumsy, brutal affair. She was too small to carry his dead weight, and Aiden had to discreetly engage his core and push through his heels, just enough to keep them from crashing to the tiles without letting her feel him help. She dumped him onto the plastic stool. He slumped forward, letting his head loll against the cold porcelain tiles. The shower turned on. Lukewarm water hit his back. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes," Sadie panted, wiping sweat from her forehead. "The water heater is dead. I boiled a kettle for the kids' bath, but—" She trailed off. She picked up a rough sponge. She started washing his shoulders. Her hands were practical, devoid of pity, just trying to get a terrible job done. The coarse sponge scraped over his collarbones, over the jagged purple scar on his left pec, where a rival had tried to gut him a decade ago. Aiden kept his eyes open, staring blankly at the drain. The humiliation was a bitter pill. He was a man who demanded absolute dignity. Now a housekeeper was washing the sweat from his back, while his children watched cartoons on a dying iPad in the next room. But beneath the humiliation was a strange, unsettling grounding. There was no flattery in her touch. no manipulation. Bianca used to run manicured nails over his chest while asking for diamond tennis bracelets. Sadie scrubbed him like a dirty floor, muttering under her breath about the price of milk. "Leo asked when you're going to wake up," Sadie said. Her voice was tight. The sponge paused on his arm. "I told him you're awake. Your body is just asleep. I don't know if he understands." She squeezed the sponge. Soapy water cascaded down his ribs. "I don't know if you understand," she whispered, her voice dropping. "I don't know if you're in there, but if you are, this sucks. I'm sorry." Aiden didn't flinch. He didn't blink when a stray drop of soapy water hit his eyelash. But a slow, dark anger began to simmer in his chest. Not at Sadie, at Declan, at Bianca, at the men who took his empire and left his children to starve in a freezing house. Sadie wrapped a heavy towel around his shoulders, shivering in her own damp t-shirt. She smelled like wet cotton and sheer exhaustion. "Okay, let's get you dressed." That afternoon, she sat him in the living room. Leo and Mia were playing on the rug at his feet. Mia was trying to build a tower out of old wooden blocks. It kept falling over. Aiden watched her through the veil of his vacant stare. He wanted to reach down. He wanted to steady the base block. He had never played blocks with her before. He had been too busy running a syndicate. Leo scooted closer to the wheelchair. The boy smelled like peanut butter and dust. He rested his small hand on Aiden's lifeless right knee. "Dad," Leo said quietly. Aiden's breath caught. He forced his chest to rise and fall evenly. "The monster under the bed is gone," Leo whispered, his dark eyes staring up at Aiden's unseeing face. "Sadie chased it away with the broom. You don't have to worry." Aiden felt a sudden sharp pressure behind his eyes. A foreign sensation. He swallowed it down, burying it under years of hardened concrete. He let his right hand resting on the armrest twitch just a fraction of an inch. A microscopic tremor. Leo didn't notice. But Sadie, walking into the room with 2 plates of sliced apples, stopped dead in her tracks. She stared at his hand. Aiden let the hand go entirely limp again. He had to be careful. The cracks were showing. The illusion shattered on a Tuesday. Rain lashed against the windows, a relentless percussive beat that masked the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway. Aiden was parked in the corner of the kitchen, staring at a stain on the refrigerator door. Sadie was at the sink, furiously scrubbing a pot with cold water, her shoulders tense. Then came the heavy thud against the front door. Sadie froze. The water kept running. Another thud. Then the sharp metallic crunch of the lock giving way. Aiden's heart slammed against his ribs, a sudden spike of adrenaline flooding his system. He didn't move his head, but his peripheral vision locked onto the hallway entrance. Footsteps. Heavy boots on hardwood. Not Declan. Declan wore custom Italian leather. This was a grunt. A man stepped into the kitchen. He was broad-shouldered, wearing a damp leather jacket. Water dripped from his shaved head. It was Mickey, a low-level enforcer who used to run collections for Aiden's docks. Mickey was stupid, mean, and opportunistic. "Well, well," Mickey grunted, stepping fully into the room. "Place is a ghost town." Declan said the bitch cleared out. Sadie dropped the sponge. She turned around, gripping the edge of the sink. She put herself between Mickey and the hallway where the kids were sleeping. "Who are you?" Sadie demanded. Her voice shook, but she didn't step back. "Relax, sweetheart," Mickey sneered, looking around the kitchen, his eyes landing on the silver espresso machine. "Just here to collect some severance. Boss man here owes a lot of people a lot of money." Mickey walked toward Aiden. He stood right in front of the wheelchair. Aiden stared straight through him, focusing on the buttons of Mickey's jacket. The smell of cheap beer, wet leather, and stale tobacco hit Aiden's nose. Mickey waved a thick, calloused hand in front of Aiden's face. "Spooky!" Mickey laughed. He grabbed Aiden's jaw, squeezing the cheeks roughly. "Like a stuffed bear. Hey, boss, where'd the wife hide the good jewelry?" Aiden let his head move with the force of the grip, offering zero resistance. His muscles screamed to snap Mickey's wrist to drive a palm up into the man's nose and shatter the cartilage into his brain. It would take 2 seconds. Not yet, Aiden thought. If Mickey goes missing, Declan sends 10 men. Mickey released him in disgust. He turned to Sadie. "All right, Maid. Where's the safe?" "There is no safe," Sadie said, her chin tipping up. "The house is empty. Get out." "Don't lie to me," Mickey growled, stepping toward her. "I'm not lying," Sadie shouted, reaching behind her and grabbing the heavy iron skillet from the dish rack. Her knuckles were white. "She took everything. Leave us alone." Mickey stopped. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. "You got some mouth on you. Maybe you know where the cash is. Or maybe we just spent some time figuring it out." He lunged for her. Sadie swung the skillet. It was a wild, desperate arc. Mickey deflected it easily with his forearm grunting at the impact. He ripped the pan from her hands and tossed it across the kitchen. It hit the tile with a deafening crash. Mickey grabbed Sadie by the hair. She screamed a raw, terrified sound, thrashing against his grip. In the hallway, Mia started crying. Aiden's vision went red. The cold, calculated Mafia boss vanished. The paralyzed man died in the chair. As Mickey raised his backhand to strike Sadie across the face, Aiden moved. He didn't just move. He exploded. Aiden launched out of the wheelchair, silent and lethal. His legs stiff, but coiled with suppressed rage, propelled him forward. He crossed the kitchen in a heartbeat. Mickey didn't even have time to turn his head. Aiden's left arm snaked around Mickey's thick neck, applying a textbook blood choke, while his right hand grabbed a fistful of Mickey's leather jacket at the lower back. With a violent twisting motion, Aiden swept Mickey's legs out from under him. They crashed to the floor. Aiden landed on top his knee, driving into Mickey's spine, pinning him flat. His forearm was locked tight against Mickey's carotid artery. Mickey flailed, choking his hands, desperately clawing at Aiden's arm. But Aiden's grip was iron. He leaned in, pressing his lips to Mickey's ear. "You're tracking mud on my floor," Aiden whispered. His voice was a rasp of pure concentrated venom, unused for a month. Mickey's eyes bulged in absolute terror. He stared up at the man who was supposed to be a vegetable. The struggling weakened. 10 seconds. 12 seconds. Mickey went limp. Aiden held the choke for 3 more seconds, ensuring deep unconsciousness before releasing him. He stood up slowly. His joints popped. His breathing was heavy, ragged. He stood to his full height, rolling his shoulders, shaking out the phantom paralysis from his hands. He turned around. Sadie was pressed flat against the kitchen counter. Her hands were covering her mouth. Her eyes were wide, taking in the unconscious thug on the floor, and then slowly tracking up to Aiden. Aiden looked at her. He didn't put the blank mask back on. His eyes were sharp-focused and entirely alive. "Sadie," Aiden said, his voice low and gravelly. "Go lock the front door." Sadie didn't run. She didn't scream. She stared at Aiden, her chest heaving, the harsh kitchen fluorescence reflecting in her wide eyes. The only sound in the room was the heavy rhythmic drumming of rain against the window pane, and the wet rattling breaths coming from Mickey's unconscious body on the linoleum. Aiden's legs began to tremble. The adrenaline spike was crashing, leaving behind the brutal reality of a month spent motionless. Fire laced through his calves. His lower back screamed in protest. He gripped the edge of the granite counter, his knuckles white, fighting the sudden dizzying urge to vomit. He had spent 30 days pretending to be a corpse, and his body had almost believed it. "The door, Sadie," Aiden repeated. The gravel in his voice was thicker this time, stripped of the commanding edge. It sounded like an order pulled through broken glass. Sadie blinked. The spell broke. She sidestepped Mickey's limp legs and practically lunged for the front hallway. Aiden heard the deadbolt slide home with a heavy, satisfying metallic thud. When she returned to the kitchen, she didn't come close. She stood near the archway, her arms wrapped tightly around her own ribs. She looked at the wheelchair sitting empty and useless in the corner, and then at Aiden, who was heavily leaning against the sink. "You're not paralyzed," she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a worldview fracturing. "No." "You're not blind." "No." Sadie let out a short, hysterical breath. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. "The kids. Leo. Leo sat there and told you the monster under his bed was gone. He was crying. You didn't even blink." "If I blinked," Aiden said, shifting his weight to ease the burning in his right knee, "Declan would have seen it. There's a pinhole camera in the study smoke detector. Another in the primary bedroom. They wanted a vegetable. I gave them one." "You let your wife leave." "Bianca was sleeping with Declan 6 months before the crash," Aiden said flatly. "She didn't pack her bags today. She packed them in February." Sadie dropped her hands. The terror in her eyes was slowly being eclipsed by something else, a hard, jagged resentment. She looked at the sponge resting in the sink. She looked at Aiden's clean face. "I bathed you," she said. Her voice dropped an octave, vibrating with a quiet, dangerous anger. "I wiped your chin. I changed your goddamn clothes while you just sat there and watched me." Aiden met her gaze. He didn't look away and he didn't apologize. He couldn't afford shame. "You did your job. And because you did your job, Declan's men thought I was a rotting piece of furniture. It kept us alive." "It kept you alive," Sadie shot back, stepping forward. The smell of fear was entirely gone from her, now replaced by the sharp electric scent of fury. "I was getting paid $9 an hour to wipe down a Mafia boss while his enemies circled the house. You used me as a prop." "Yes." Aiden stated it simply. No embellishment. Sadie stared at him, her jaw tight. She looked down at Mickey, who groaned, his fingers twitching against the tile. "There are heavy-duty zip ties in the drawer next to the oven," Aiden said, nodding toward the cabinets. "Get them. Then get a kitchen towel and soak it in cold water." "I'm not your soldier." "No, you're the woman who just brained a Maid man's enforcer with a cast-iron skillet," Aiden said, pushing himself off the counter. His legs wobbled, but he locked his knees, forcing himself to stand tall. "If Mickey wakes up and walks out that door, Declan will know I'm awake. If Declan knows I'm awake, he sends a crew. They won't leave witnesses. Not me. Not Leo. Not Mia. And definitely not the maid who cracked Mickey's arm." He watched the math happen in her head. He watched the realization settle over her shoulders like a lead blanket. She was in it now. The perimeter had shrunk to the walls of this freezing house. Sadie turned, opened the drawer, and pulled out a handful of thick black plastic ties. She tossed them onto the counter near Aiden. "He's heavy," Sadie muttered, grabbing a towel and turning on the tap. "I'm not helping you carry him." "You won't have to." Aiden grabbed the zip ties. He knelt beside Mickey, his joints popping loudly in the quiet kitchen. He dragged Mickey's heavy arms behind his back. The leather jacket squeaked. He fed the plastic strip through the square head and pulled. The sharp zip, zip, zip echoed off the walls, a mechanical finality. He bound the wrist tight enough to cut circulation, then looped another tie around Mickey's ankles. Mickey groaned again, his eyelids fluttering. "The towel," Aiden said, reaching out a hand. Sadie handed him the dripping cloth. Aiden grabbed Mickey by the collar, hauling the groggy man up into a sitting position against the lower cabinets. Mickey's head lolled. Aiden slapped the freezing wet towel directly over Mickey's face, holding it there for a brutal 3 seconds. Mickey choked, gasping, thrashing against the plastic restraints. The towel fell away. His bleary eyes focused on Aiden. "What the?" Mickey spat, coughing up a line of spit. He looked at his bound hands, then up at Aiden's cold, dead eyes. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The color completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly mottled gray. "Boss." "Hello, Mickey," Aiden said softly. He remained kneeling, putting himself at eye level. "You're tracking mud on my floor." "Boss, I swear to God, I didn't know. Declan said—" "I know what Declan said." Aiden leaned closer. The smell of stale beer and terrified sweat radiated off the man. "Declan said I was dead meat. Declan said the house was empty. But you didn't come here on Declan's orders. Did you, Mickey? Declan's a professional. He wouldn't send a drunk to steal my wife's jewelry." Mickey swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing against his thick neck. "I was just passing by." Aiden's right hand moved. It wasn't a punch. It was a calculated, open-handed strike to the side of Mickey's neck, hitting the vagus nerve just hard enough to send a shockwave of nausea and pain through the man's system. Mickey gagged, his eyes watering. "Try again," Aiden whispered. Okay, Mickey wheezed. "It was just a grab, a side hustle. Declan's having a sit-down on Friday at the old meatpacking plant. He's dividing up the south side. I figured I'd get a piece of the pie before the house got seized by the feds." Friday. 3 days. Declan was moving fast. He was tearing the empire down to the studs. Aiden stood up. He looked at Sadie, who was watching the exchange with a mixture of horror and grim fascination. "Get a roll of duct tape from the garage," Aiden told her. "We're putting him in the basement." Mickey began to thrash in earnest. "Boss, come on. You can't put me down there. It's freezing." Boss, Aiden ignored him. He looked at Sadie. She hadn't moved. "Sadie," he said, his tone softening just a fraction. It wasn't kindness. It was a negotiation. "I can't carry him down the stairs. I need you to grab his legs." She stared at the duct tape on the counter. She looked down the dark hallway where the children slept. Slowly, deliberately, she walked over to Mickey's bound feet. "If he kicks me," Sadie said, her voice shaking but resolute, "I'm hitting him with the skillet again." Aiden permitted himself a very small, very dark half-smile. "Fair enough." The basement smelled like damp earth copper pipes and old cardboard. The only light came from a single bare bulb swinging gently from the rafter, casting long, erratic shadows across the concrete floor. Mickey was secured to a heavy cast-iron support beam. His mouth was taped shut. His eyes followed Aiden with the frantic rolling panic of a trapped horse. Aiden stood at the bottom of the stairs, leaning heavily against the wooden railing. His muscles were violently cramping again. He forced himself to breathe through the pain, projecting absolute stillness. "You're going to stay here," Aiden told the bound man. His voice echoed slightly in the cavernous space. "I'll make sure you get water. But if you make a sound, if you kick that beam, if you scream through that tape, I won't come down here." "Sadie will." Mickey looked at the stairs where Sadie's shadow was visible on the landing above. He nodded vigorously, a pathetic, jerky motion. Aiden turned and slowly climbed the stairs. Every step was a negotiation with his own biology. His knees felt like they were packed with ground glass. By the time he reached the top and closed the heavy basement door, he was covered in a cold sweat. He walked into the kitchen and sank into one of the wooden dining chairs. He didn't sit. He collapsed. Sadie was at the stove, boiling water in a small saucepan. The power grid was still dead, but she had hooked up a small camping stove she found in the garage. She poured the boiling water into a French press, plunging the filter down. The rich, bitter smell of coffee filled the room, cutting through the lingering scent of wet leather. She poured 2 mugs and slid one across the table to Aiden. It was black, no sugar, just the way he drank it. She hadn't asked. She sat opposite him, wrapping both hands around her mug for warmth. "So, you're awake. You're broke. Your house is a target. And we have a hostage in the basement." "That about covers it," Aiden said, taking a sip. The heat burned his throat, waking up nerve endings that had been dormant for weeks. "What happens on Friday?" Sadie asked. Her eyes were fixed on the dark liquid in her cup. "Declan formalizes the takeover." Aiden explained, his voice low and steady. "He gets the remaining capos in a room. He shows them the books. He proves I'm out of the picture, and he offers them a bigger cut of the ports to keep the peace. Once they agree, my life is a loose end. He'll send a cleanup crew here to burn the house down with us inside. It's cleaner than a bullet." Sadie's head snapped up. The color drained from her cheeks. "Us? You've seen my face. You know I can walk. You're a liability now." Aiden didn't sugarcoat it. He watched her process the terror, waiting for her to break. She didn't break. She took a slow, deep breath, her nostrils flaring. "Okay, so how do we stop him?" Aiden raised an eyebrow. Don't flatter yourself," Sadie snapped, glaring at him. "I don't give a damn about your territory or your docks. But I care about Leo and Mia. And I care about not burning to death in a house I don't even own. So what's the play?" Aiden studied her. The faded t-shirt, the exhausted, bruised eyes, the absolute lack of pretense. She was terrifyingly practical. "Declan froze my primary accounts," Aiden said, tapping a finger against the ceramic mug. "But I didn't build this city by trusting banks. I have safety nets, ghosts in the machine. I need a line to the outside to activate them." He reached into the pocket of his sweatpants and pulled out a small, heavy brass key. He slid it across the wooden table. It stopped an inch from her hand. "Locker 402, Union Station," Aiden said. "There's a duffel bag inside. I need it." Sadie looked at the key. It looked ancient, tarnished at the edges. "Union Station is downtown. It's a 2-hour bus ride." "I have cash in the wall safe upstairs. Take enough for a cab." "And if Declan's men are watching the station—" "They aren't," Aiden said with a certainty he didn't entirely feel. "Declan thinks I'm a vegetable and Bianca is in St. Bart's. He's focused on the sit-down. But you still need to be careful. Wear a hat. Keep your head down. Sadie picked up the key. The metal was cold. She slipped it into the pocket of her jeans. She stood up, finishing her coffee in one long gulp. I need to check on the kids first. If they wake up and I'm not here... I'll watch them, Aiden said. Sadie stopped in the doorway. She turned back, looking at him with a complex, unreadable expression. You can't talk to them. If Leo knows you're awake, he'll tell someone. He's 6. He can't keep a secret. I know, Aiden said. The words tasted like ash. You just sit there, like you were. I know. She stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked down the hall. An hour later, Sadie was gone. The house settled back into its oppressive, hollow silence. Aiden navigated the hallways in his wheelchair. He couldn't risk walking. The windows were large, and anyone with a pair of binoculars in the tree line would see him. He wheeled himself into the children's room. The air was stale, smelling of sleep and unwashed cotton. Leo and Mia were tangled together on the bottom bunk of the bed, a mess of limbs and blankets. Mia was breathing heavily through her mouth, her thumb resting near her lips. Leo had one arm thrown protectively over his sister. Aiden parked the chair near the foot of the bed. He sat in the darkness, listening to the rhythm of their breathing. He wanted to reach out. He wanted to smooth the tangled hair from Leo's forehead. He wanted to tell them that the monsters were dead, that their father was back, that no one would ever abandon them again. He kept his hands firmly on the armrests. Patience, he told himself. Concrete set slowly. By late afternoon, the rain had turned into a thick, miserable fog. The front door unlocked with a click. Aiden heard the squeak of wet rubber soles on the hardwood. He wheeled himself out into the foyer. Sadie stood by the door, dripping wet. Her cheap coat was plastered to her shoulders. She looked exhausted, her hair plastered to her skull, her lips slightly blue from the cold. But in her right hand she gripped the handle of a faded, heavy canvas duffel bag. She dropped it on the floor with a heavy thud. It sounded like it was filled with bricks. Locker 402, Sadie panted, wiping rain from her eyes. She looked up at Aiden. There was a guy in a suit by the newsstand. He kept looking at the lockers. I waited in the women's bathroom for 40 minutes until he left to get a coffee. Then I grabbed it and ran. Aiden felt a surge of genuine respect. It was a cold, unfamiliar emotion. You did well, Sadie. She didn't smile. She kicked off her wet shoes and knelt beside the bag. She grabbed the heavy brass zipper and pulled it open. Aiden leaned forward. Inside the bag, wrapped in thick plastic, were 4 prepaid burner phones. 6 passports with different names and matching faces. A heavy silenced Heckler & Koch USP tactical pistol. And underneath it all, bound in tight rubber bands, were thick stacks of $100 bills. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sadie stared at the money. Then she stared at the gun. The reality of what she had just transported hit her. She pulled her hands back, as if the bag were filled with snakes. What is all this? She whispered. Aiden picked up one of the burner phones. He peeled the plastic off the screen. The weight of the plastic felt perfect in his hand. It was the weight of control. The weight of resurrection. This, Aiden said, looking at the blinking green light of the phone, is how we burned Declan's house to the ground. The burner phone felt small and cheap in Aiden's hand, the plastic casing smooth against his calloused thumb. He sat at the kitchen table, the only light coming from a battery-powered camping lantern Sadie had found. It cast long yellow shadows against the walls, making the cavernous room feel like a bunker. He punched in a sequence of numbers he hadn't thought about in 3 years. 11 digits. An international relay that would bounce twice before landing in a rundown garage in South Boston. He pressed call. He put the phone to his ear. 1 ring. 2. The line clicked open. No greeting. Just the low, staticky hum of a secure connection, and the faint sound of a socket wrench hitting concrete in the background. The weather in the city, Aiden said, his voice dropping to a gravelly monotone, is unseasonably cold. The wrenching stopped. For 5 seconds there was absolute silence on the line. Then a sharp exhale of cigarette smoke. I heard the weatherman was dead, a raspy voice replied. Finn, an independent contractor who specialized in demolitions and problem disappearances. Finn didn't work for the syndicate. He worked for the man who paid him, and Aiden had once paid for Finn's daughter to have experimental leukemia treatments in Switzerland. A debt like that didn't expire with a car crash. The weatherman took a vacation, Aiden said. He's back, and he needs a storm on Friday at the old meatpacking plant on the south side. Declan, sit down, Finn said. The scrape of a match echoed through the speaker. The whole city knows about it. He's bringing the capos. Security will be a wall of meat. You want me to punch a hole? I want you to bring the roof down, literally. But I need 10 minutes inside, before the plaster falls. 10 minutes is a lifetime in a room full of guns, Aiden. I know. I'll need hardware, and I need a layout of the structural supports. You'll have both by tomorrow night, Aiden said. Check the dead drop at St. Jude's. He disconnected the call, snapping the cheap plastic phone in half and tossing the pieces into the trash can. He leaned back in the wooden chair. His lower spine gave a dull, throbbing ache. He reached for the HK tactical pistol resting on the table next to the stacks of cash. He hit the magazine release. The heavy clip slid out and hit his palm with a satisfying smack. He racked the slide, inspecting the chamber. Clean, well-oiled. It smelled strongly of Hops No. 9 solvent, a sharp metallic scent that cut right through the lingering odor of stale coffee. Sadie walked into the kitchen. She stopped at the edge of the lantern's glow. She was carrying a plastic bowl of cold cereal. The milk was running low, watered down to stretch it for the kids. She stared at the gun in Aiden's hands. She didn't flinch, but her jaw tightened. Is that for Declan? She asked, setting the bowl down on the counter. Declan doesn't warrant a bullet this expensive, Aiden said, sliding the magazine back in with a sharp click. This is for anyone who gets between me and him. Sadie crossed her arms, rubbing her elbows to ward off the chill. The house was freezing now. Leo asked why the bad man in the leather jacket was sleeping on our floor earlier. I told him it was a delivery guy who tripped and bumped his head. Aiden stopped wiping down the barrel. He looked up at her. Did he buy it? He's 6. He believes what he needs to believe to feel safe. Sadie leaned against the counter, her eyes tracing the harsh lines of Aiden's face in the yellow light. I don't think he really believes you're asleep anymore either. Aiden's chest tightened, a dull, heavy pressure. Why? Because you're tense. When I was bathing you last week, you were dead weight. Today, when I wheeled you past his door, your shoulders were rigid. You're bracing yourself. He can feel it. Kids are like dogs, Mr. Hayes. They smell a shift in the air. Aiden set the gun down on the table. He rubbed his face with both hands, the stubble on his jaw scratching loudly against his palms. He felt a sudden violent urge to walk down the hall, pick Leo up and hold him. Just hold him, to smell the peanut butter and dust on his hair. Instead, he looked at Sadie. You know you can leave right with the cash from the bag. You could take 20 grand. Walk out the door right now. Go back to your life. Pay off your debt. Sadie looked at the neatly banded stacks of $100 bills. 20 grand was more money than she had seen in her entire life. It was freedom. It was a new apartment, a working heater, an empty sink. She looked from the money back to Aiden. And leave the kids with a man who pretends to be a corpse, she asked, her voice flat, devoid of humor. No thanks. Somebody has to make sure they eat vegetables. She turned and walked back toward the bedrooms. Aiden watched her go. For the first time in his life, Aiden Hayes felt a profound, unsettling sense of inadequacy. He commanded hundreds of violent men. He moved millions of dollars through offshore accounts. But this exhausted 22-year-old girl in cheap denim was holding his family together with watered-down milk and sheer defiance. He didn't sleep that night. He spent hours on the kitchen floor, forcing his atrophied muscles through brutal, agonizing sets of push-ups and stretches. Every movement burned. Every joint popped. He was sweating profusely, the salt stinging his eyes. He had to be fast on Friday. If his knee buckled when he drew his weapon, he was dead. Around 3 a.m., a floorboard creaked in the hallway. Aiden froze mid-push-up, his chest an inch from the linoleum. He didn't breathe. A small shadow appeared in the archway. Leo. The boy stood in his oversized pajamas, rubbing one eye with a small fist. He looked toward the kitchen, toward the shape on the floor. Aiden held perfectly still. The pain in his shoulders was blinding. His triceps screamed, begging him to drop. He clamped his jaw shut, tasting copper. Leo stood there for a long time. The silence stretched heavy and fragile. "Dad," Leo whispered into the dark. Aiden closed his eyes. He let his chest drop just a fraction of an inch to ease the load, but he didn't answer. He couldn't. After a minute, Leo sniffled quietly, turned around and padded back down the hall. Aiden let himself collapse against the cold floor. He lay there gasping silently for air, his chest heaving. The physical pain was nothing compared to the violent tearing sensation in his gut. Friday, he told himself, staring at the dust under the cabinets. Friday. I end this. Thursday morning broke gray and bitter. The fog hadn't lifted. It had thickened, pressing against the windows like wet cotton. Aiden unlocked the basement door. He didn't take a flashlight. He knew the stairs by heart. The smell hit him halfway down. Urine, sweat, and absolute terror. Mickey was slumped against the iron pillar, his head hanging off to the side. When he heard Aiden's heavy footsteps on the concrete, he jolted violently, his eyes blowing wide in the dim light. The duct tape across his mouth was soggy with saliva and mucus. Aiden pulled a wooden stool over and sat in front of them. He let the silence hang for a full minute. He watched Mickey's chest heave. He watched the man's bravado bleed out onto the dirty floor. Aiden reached out and ripped the tape off in one fast, vicious motion. Mickey gasped, coughing, his lips torn and bleeding. "Water! Please, boss! Give me water!" Aiden pulled a small plastic water bottle from his pocket. He unscrewed the cap and held it to Mickey's mouth. Mickey drank greedily, spilling half of it down his chin and onto his chest. Aiden pulled it away before he could finish. "The meat packing plant," Aiden said, his voice calm, entirely conversational. "Which one?" "The old Rossi place," Mickey rasped, licking his split lip. "On 4th and Pike. Boss, I swear I just—" "Who is working the door?" Mickey hesitated. Aiden simply screwed the cap back onto the water bottle. "Donnie," Mickey choked out. "Donnie and Big Mike. They're on the front steel doors. Declan has snipers on the catwalks inside. 2 of them, suppressed rifles." "Where is the sit-down happening?" "The main freezer floor. They drained the ammonia pipes yesterday. It's cleared out. Declan is bringing the ledger." Mickey looked up, his eyes pleading. "Boss, you can't go in there. It's a fortress. He's got 30 guys. You're a ghost. Stay a ghost. Take the money and leave." Aiden looked at the man. Mickey wasn't lying. He was too terrified to lie. 30 guys, Aiden murmured. "Good to know." He stood up, kicking the stool aside. He pulled a fresh strip of duct tape from his pocket. Mickey started thrashing immediately. "No! No, wait, I told you what you wanted." "Come on, boss. You can't just leave me down here." Aiden slapped the tape over Mickey's mouth, silencing the screaming. He leaned in close. "You tried to hit the woman protecting my children. You're lucky I need the basement clean." Aiden walked back up the stairs. He didn't look back. Upstairs, the preparation began. Aiden walked into his primary bathroom. The mirror was coated in a thin film of dust. He wiped it away with his forearm. He looked at himself. Truly looked. He had lost 15 pounds of muscle. His cheekbones were sharp, jutting out under pale, sallow skin. His hair was too long, curling wildly around his ears. He looked like a corpse that had clawed its way out of a pine box. He found a straight razor in his vanity drawer. No shaving cream, just cold water from the tap. He dragged the blade across his jaw. It scraped loudly in the quiet bathroom, pulling at the skin, leaving small red wheels behind. He shaved off a month of enforced helplessness. He shaved off the paralyzed victim. When he was done, his face was raw, bleeding in 2 places. But the sharp, cruel angles of Aiden Hayes had returned. He went to his closet. Bianca had taken his custom Italian suits, selling them to a fence, or throwing them away, he didn't care. But she had missed the garment bag pushed all the way to the back. Aiden unzipped it. Inside was a heavy charcoal wool suit. It was old. 5 years out of style. It smelled faintly of cedar and dried tobacco. He stripped off the sweatpants he had worn for 30 days and put the suit on. The fabric settled heavily on his shoulders. The waistband was loose, but his belt cinched it tight. He slid the shoulder holster over his left arm, snapping the HK pistol into place. The weight pressed reassuringly against his ribs. He walked out into the living room. Sadie was sitting on the couch, reading a faded copy of The Very Hungry Caterpillar to Mia. Leo was pushing a toy truck across the rug. When Aiden stepped into the room, the sound stopped. Sadie froze. The book slipped slightly in her hands. She stared at the man standing before her. The sweatpants and the vacant stare were gone. This was the man who owned the city. He radiated a cold, suffocating authority. Leo dropped his truck. He stood up slowly. His mouth fell open. "Dad!" Leo breathed. The word trembled. Aiden looked at his son. The urge to break, to fall to his knees and pull the boy against his chest was overwhelming. It clawed at the back of his throat. But he couldn't. If he broke now, the armor would crack, and he needed the armor for tomorrow. "Listen to me, Leo," Aiden said. His voice was steady. but there was a thickness to it that hadn't been there before. "I have to go to work. I need you to be the man of the house while I'm gone. You listen to Sadie. You protect your sister." Leo's eyes welled with tears, but he nodded, his little jaw setting in a startling imitation of his father's. Aiden turned his gaze to Sadie. He walked over to the coffee table and set down one of the burner phones. 2 of the passports and a smaller snub-nosed .38 revolver he had pulled from the go bag. Sadie looked at the gun. She didn't touch it. "My sit-down is at noon tomorrow." Aiden said, his voice dropping so the kids couldn't hear the specifics. "If this phone doesn't ring by 3 p.m., it means I'm not coming back." Sadie swallowed hard. She looked up at him, her dark eyes entirely unreadable. "And if you don't call, there's $80,000 in the bag. You take it. You take the kids. You use the passports. There's a guy named Elias in Montreal. The number is in the phone. He owes me his life. He will hide you." Sadie picked up the heavy little revolver. It looked massive in her small, red-chapped hands. She checked the safety, a clumsy but deliberate motion. "I'm not a babysitter anymore, am I?" she said quietly. "No," Aiden said. "You're a guardian." He reached out. It was the first time he had touched her since the day she had washed him in the freezing shower. He placed his large scarred hand over hers, pressing the cold steel of the gun between their palms. "Don't hesitate, Sadie," he whispered, his eyes locked on hers. "If someone comes through that door and it isn't me, you shoot center mass. You pull the trigger until it clicks. Do you understand?" Sadie looked at the scarred hand covering hers. She looked at the man who had been a ghost in a wheelchair, who was now walking out the door to wage a one-man war. She nodded once. "Center mass. Until it clicks." Aiden held her gaze for 1 second longer, acknowledging the absolute terrifying trust passing between them. Then he let go. He turned, walked to the front door, and stepped out into the freezing fog. Behind him, the deadbolt clicked shut. The fog tasted like diesel and wet asphalt. The old Rossi meatpacking plant sat at the dead end of 4th and Pike, a sprawling windowless fortress of corrugated steel and stained concrete. It looked like a rusted iron lung, silently breathing in the mist. Aiden parked the stolen sedan 2 blocks away. He walked the rest of the distance. Every step was a negotiation. His right thigh cramped violently, the muscle seizing tight, forcing him to drag his heel for half a block until it loosened. He leaned heavily against a brick alleyway wall, gasping cold sweat dripping down his ribs under the heavy wool suit. He wasn't a machine. 30 days of sitting in a chair had stripped the shock absorbers from his joints. He popped 3 ibuprofen dry, swallowed them past a tight throat, and kept walking. At the loading dock, the massive steel roll-up doors were down. A side door was propped open. Donnie and Big Mike stood outside smoking. They were huge men, thick with cheap muscle and bad intent, wearing heavy parkas against the damp chill. Aiden didn't try to fight them hand to hand. He didn't have the leverage, and he didn't have the time. He drew the HK Tactical, checking the suppressor. He stepped out from behind a rusted dumpster, raising the weapon. Mike saw him first. His jaw dropped, the cigarette falling from his lips. He reached for the bulge under his coat, but he was too slow, too shocked by the dead man walking out of the fog. 2 muffled cracks. Mike dropped a neat hole above his left eyebrow. Donnie didn't even have time to yell. Aiden pivoted, firing twice into Donnie's chest. The big man hit the wet concrete with a heavy, wet slap. Aiden walked past them, stepping carefully over the spreading dark pool. He didn't check their pulses. Center mass until they drop. He slipped through the steel door. The air inside was 20 degrees colder than the street. The main freezer floor was a cavernous space stripped of its meat hooks. The concrete floor bleached white from decades of lie. Aiden stayed in the shadows of the rusted conveyor belts. He looked up. Through the gloom, he spotted the two snipers Mickey had mentioned. They were positioned on the opposite metal catwalks, lying prone, their rifle scopes scanning the lower entrances. Aiden checked his heavy steel wristwatch. 11:51 a.m. Finn was punctual. Aiden had 9 minutes. In the center of the freezer floor, a folding table had been set up under a harsh halogen work light. Declan sat at the head. He was 32, sharply handsome, wearing a tailored navy cashmere coat. He looked like a hedge fund manager, not a street boss. Around him sat 4 of the city's oldest capos, hard men with gray hair and thick necks. The ports are bleeding money because of Aiden's old allegiances, Declan was saying. His voice echoed off the tile walls, smooth and confident. He tapped a thick leather-bound ledger on the table. I'm restructuring. We cut the old guard, bring in the Romanians for distribution, and profits go up 30% by Q3. Aiden is a vegetable. His wife took her cut and ran. The Hayes Arrow is a closed book. One of the capos, an old man named Sal, coughed into his fist. And the kids? It's bad business, leaving bloodlines unresolved. I'll have a crew handle the house tonight, Declan said, not missing a beat. A gas leak. Tragic. The neighborhood goes up in smoke, and we collect the insurance on the estate. In the shadows, Aiden felt his pulse slow down. The burning in his legs vanished, replaced by an icy, absolute stillness. The father died. The monster woke up. He stepped out of the darkness and walked into the pool of halogen light. His footsteps echoed. Tap, tap, tap. The conversation at the table died instantly. Sal pushed his chair back so hard it scraped a terrible screech across the concrete. Declan stopped breathing. The color violently drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax mannequin. Aiden stood 20 feet away. He looked terrible. His face was gaunt, covered in shaving nicks, his eyes sunken into dark bruised sockets. He looked exactly like a ghost. Aiden, Declan whispered. The word barely made it out of his throat. You're wearing cashmere and a freezer, Declan, Aiden said. His voice was a rasp loud in the dead silence. You always were more concerned with the aesthetic of power than the application of it. On the catwalks, the snipers scrambled, racking the bolts of their rifles. Don't, Aiden said, not looking up. He kept his eyes locked on Declan. My thumb is resting on a dead man's switch in my pocket. If my heart stops, a localized EMP triggers a C4 charge strapped to the primary support pillar right above your head, Declan. We all die. It was a complete lie, but Aiden delivered it with the flat, dead-eyed certainty of a man who had already accepted his own funeral. The snipers froze, waiting for an order. Declan swallowed his throat, clicking. You're bluffing, Declan said. His hands were shaking slightly. He pressed them flat against the ledger. Am I? Aiden checked his watch. 11:58. 2 minutes. You came here to die, Aiden. Declan sneered, finding a sliver of his courage. You're outnumbered. You're broken. Look at you. You can barely stand. I didn't come here to kill you, Declan. I came here to ask you a question. Aiden took a slow, agonizing step forward. You took my accounts. You took my lieutenants. You even took Bianca, though you can keep her. She was always expensive to maintain. Aiden stopped. His eyes went dead. But you shut off the heat in my house. My children were cold. Why would you do that? Declan stared at him, genuinely bewildered. What? My daughter had to sleep in her coat. Aiden, you're insane. It's over. Take him out, Declan screamed to the catwalks. Aiden looked at his watch. 11:59. 55. Weather's bad, Aiden whispered. At exactly 12, the roof tore open. It wasn't a fireball. Finn was a professional. It was a concussive shock wave that punched downward. The deafening roar sucked the oxygen out of the room. The ceiling directly above the catwalks buckled, shearing the iron bolts. Concrete slabs the size of cars plummeted. The snipers didn't even scream. They were simply crushed as the metal walkways collapsed under tons of debris. A thick, blinding cloud of gray dust exploded across the freezer floor. Aiden moved before the first brick hit the ground. He didn't draw his gun. He lunged across the folding table, tackling Declan backward in his chair. They hit the lye-bleached concrete in a tangle of limbs. Declan was younger, faster, and well-fed. He threw a wild elbow that caught Aiden under the eye, splitting the skin to the bone. The pain flared, blinding and hot. Aiden grunted, rolling, using his dead weight to pin Declan's hip. Declan clawed at his coat, pulling a small silver pistol from his waistband. Aiden grabbed the barrel with his bare left hand. The metal bit into his palm. Declan pulled the trigger. The slide caught the web of Aiden's thumb, slicing it open, but the casing failed to eject. The gun jammed. Declan panicked, kicking wildly. His heavy Italian shoe connected with Aiden's bad knee. A ragged animal scream tore from Aiden's throat. His vision whited out. The weakness, the atrophy, the sheer exhaustion of the last 30 days threatened to pull him under. He could feel Declan wriggling out from beneath him. The monster under the bed is gone, Leo's voice echoed in his head. Aiden's right hand found a jagged, broken piece of rebar in the dust. He gripped it. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He drove it downward. Declan gasped. The fight stopped instantly. The dust began to settle. The emergency sprinklers kicked on, raining rusty, freezing water down on the wreckage. Aiden lay on his side, gasping, coughing up drywall dust. He forced himself to his hands and knees. Blood dripped from his face, mixing with the water on the floor. He looked at Declan. The cashmere coat was ruined. Aiden slowly stood up. His knee screamed, but it held. He looked around. The 4 capos were huddled under a surviving concrete overhang, coughing covered in white dust. They looked at Aiden, terrified, expecting the gun to turn on them. Aiden didn't raise the weapon. He limped toward the exit. The haze era's over, Aiden rasped over his shoulder. Keep the ports, keep the streets. But if a single one of your men ever drives down my street, I'll pull your houses down around your families. None of them spoke. Aiden walked out into the fog. The drive home took an hour. He had to pull over twice to vomit from the pain and the adrenaline crash. By the time he turned onto his gravel driveway, it was 2:50 p.m. The house was dark, silent. Aiden unlocked the front door. The deadbolt slid back with a heavy thud. He pushed the door open. 10 feet away, standing in the hallway, was Sadie. She held the heavy .38 revolver with both hands. Her arms were shaking violently, but the barrel was leveled squarely at his chest. Center mass. Aiden froze. He raised his bloody, empty hands. "It's me," he whispered. Sadie stared at him. She looked at his ruined suit. The blood caked on his cheek. The way he was leaning entirely on the doorframe to stay upright. Slowly, she lowered the gun. She didn't drop it, but she pointed it at the floor. The relief that washed over her face was so intense, she almost collapsed. "It's 2:55, she said, her voice cracking. "Traffic," Aiden mumbled. A small head peeked out from behind Sadie's leg. "Leo." Then Mia appeared, clutching a ragged stuffed bear. Leo stared at the bruised, bloody man in the doorway. He didn't run away. He didn't cry. He walked past Sadie, stepping up to Aiden. Aiden's legs finally gave out. He slid down the door frame, collapsing to his knees on the hardwood floor right in front of his son. He was eye level with the boy. Aiden couldn't maintain the mask anymore. The concrete cracked. The mafioso died on the floor of the meatpacking plant, and all that was left was a tired, broken father. Tears cut tracks through the dust on Aiden's face. "I'm sorry." Aiden choked out his voice, breaking entirely. "I'm so sorry I stayed asleep." Leo didn't hesitate. The boy stepped forward and wrapped his small, thin arms around Aiden's neck, burying his face in the dirty, blood-stained wool of the suit. Aiden squeezed his eyes shut and hugged his son back. He pulled him tight against his chest, burying his face in the boy's hair, smelling the dust and the peanut butter. A second later, he felt Mia barrel into his side, her small hands grabbing his shirt. Aiden looked up. Sadie was leaning against the wall, wiping her own face with the back of her hand, the revolver dangling loosely by her side. "Sadie," Aiden whispered over his children's heads. She looked at him. "The water in the safe," Aiden said, managing a weak, exhausted half-smile. "Take it. Pay off your debt. But, if you don't mind." Sadie sniffled, crossing her arms. "What? I think we need a full-time nanny. The pay is better, and there are no more monsters." Sadie looked at the broken man, the crying kids, and the freezing house. She let out a long, ragged sigh. "I'll start boiling some water for pasta," she said. Aiden closed his eyes, holding his kids tighter. For the first time in a month, he was truly, completely awake. Aiden sacrificed his criminal empire, but he finally became the father his children needed. Did he make the right choice? Leaving the Capos alive, or will his past eventually catch up to him and Sadie? Let us know your theories in the comments. If this gritty, emotional ride kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and share it with someone who loves a dark redemption story. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss out on our next original audio drama. Thank you for listening,